Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whether you are a morning bird or a night owl. Welcome to the latest and greatest installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your humble yet honored host, Dr. Richard Watkins. And before we get started today, you're going to have to remember that the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, the leading scientific engagement, consulting, and research firm. Look for more information about SPAN at span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Or reach out to them at info@span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get the proceedings proceeding. Now, the Richard Watkins Podcast, as you are well aware of, is committed to lifelong learning. We don't think that learning ever stops, right? No matter how old you get, no matter how knowledgeable you are on a particular subject, there is always so much more to learn, so much more that you can know. And I think the more that you learn about something, now this is just something that I believe. Now you can take it or you can leave it. Now, live life governed by your own philosophies. As someone once said, philosophy is just the wind, right? The wind, same wind blows on us all. The philosophy is the set of our sails, right? So set your sails however you see fit. But I kind of go off of the philosophy or the thought that the more we know, the more we realize how little we know, right? The more we learn about a particular thing, the more we realize how little we know about that thing. For example, a lot of conversations are happening right now regarding artificial intelligence. What is and what is not artificial intelligence? Have we achieved general artificial intelligence? But no one stops to really define what intelligence even is. I do not think there is an agreed upon definition of intelligence. It's something that we feel like we know, but we don't actually really know. When we say what's intelligence, we'll say things like, oh, someone is smart. And if someone is smart, we'll do something like, hey, do a bunch of math problems. And if somebody figures out the math problems, then that person is smart. Other people feel that intelligence is more so emotional intelligence, understanding how other people react, how other people feel, understanding how we ourselves feel and react to certain situations. A lot of people feel that emotional intelligence is true intelligence, but in reality, nobody really knows what intelligence truly is, or who or what is the most intelligent, right? Some people can argue that a baby, right? A baby is the most intelligent because they're at the stage of life where they are the most like moldable, right? They're taking in everything, right? A baby is learning how to move, right? How to hold its growing body upright. It's learning faces, it's learning visual cues, who's who, what to be afraid of, what to trust, right? Some people might argue that that part or point in our life is the point of our life in which we are the most intelligent. Other people argue, you know, as organisms, who are the most intelligent? We've talked about animal comparisons in the past, right? But it still really begs the question, what animal is the most intelligent, right? Now, every human that you would ask will say humans are the most intelligent. But I mean, what is, how much weight does that hold, right? Because we are really our own advocates in that particular situation, right? So it's like, hey, who has the best barbecue? Well, my mom has the best barbecue, or my grandma has. Like, what's the point? You're kind of just advocating for your own brand at that point. But we might very well be the most intelligent, right? That might be the case. That might be the case. But other questions happen when we're talking about, can we look for intelligent life elsewhere? Well, that really depends on whether or not we can identify it. That really depends on whether or not, if we would see it, we would recognize it. That is very difficult to really determine. Right? What is intelligence? How much we know, how much we know. Now, if we're going to talk about how much we know and we're going off the thing, the more you know about a thing, the more you realize how little you know, I have to bring about something else, right? And that is this. There is a phrase, there's a term that goes, knowledge is power. Now, that's a really interesting, right? That's a really interesting kind of quote or saying. Everybody has really heard of it. Knowledge is power. It kind of is implying that the person who is the most intelligent is the most powerful, or intelligence equals how much we know about a thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is or maybe it isn't. But there are two problems with that. And we'll go into this on another episode. But the first problem is this: what is power? Right, that's kind of like intelligence, right? It's something that we say often, but we don't really know what it is, right? We say intelligence often, that person's intelligent, that person, but what we're really saying is, I like how that person talks, how that person communicates. But the same is true about power. What is power? There is a amazing scene on the television show, or there was a television show that has completed. It was called Game of Thrones. And there was a scene, it was an amazing scene on Game of Thrones, and I'm going to mess it up, but if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. There is an advisor, I believe, and the advisor is talking to the queen, I believe, at that point. And I think the advisor says something to the extent of, knowledge is power, right? And I think for a lot of people who've heard that saying before, they're going to say, yeah, knowledge is power, high five, da da da. The more you know, the more powerful you are. I mean, that might be the case, but that's not how that scene went. In that scene, if I remember correctly, the queen instructs her guards to apprehend the advisor, and then they proceed to apprehend the advisor. She then instructs the guard to slit the throat to kill the advisor. The guard is about to slice the throat of the advisor and kill the advisor before the queen says, no, never mind, don't do that. The guard pulls the knife or the blade away from the throat of the advisor. The advisor is relieved. She then instructs the guards to turn around and move away, and the guards proceed to turn around and move away from the advisor, I believe encircling the two who are engaged in a conversation. She tells them to then turn their back. They turn their back to both the advisor and the queen at that point. The queen then approaches the advisor, who has just said knowledge is power, and she replies back to the advisor and says, power is power. And everybody I know, because I felt it too, my heart started beating like boom, 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 like, ooh, that was such a vicious comeback. Power is power. Ooh. But then I stopped and I was like, wait, that statement makes absolutely no sense. Right? You can't define a thing by the thing itself, right? I know that was a very kind of like a very powerful clapback, right? I mean, I know I loved it, right? The guy was like, knowledge is power. And she's like, no, power is power. And he's like, he's all like sniveling, like, oh boy. And everybody's like, oh gosh, it was such a boss move. And it was. It was a boss move. If you know that scene, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That scene was epic. It was memorable. There was a lot of memorable scenes on that show, and that is one of them, right? Where the queen is like, power is power, right? But that makes no sense. You can't define a thing by the thing, right? When you say that, it still leaves the listener being like, okay, but what is power? right? I don't know what power is, and you're saying the thing that I don't know what it is the same thing. It's nonsensical. It's nonsensical. But we will tackle power later. What we want to tackle today, and we are not going to tackle it at all I'm going to do is just open up a box, and out will fly more and more questions. Okay, that is, I'm not going to answer anything today. Hopefully I will give you something to think about, and that is, how do we know what we know? Right? How do we know what we know? Right? If knowledge is power, right, then knowledge is just knowing things, and we have to say, well, how do we know what we know? How do we know what we know? Like, think about it for a second. The things you know, how do you know them? Like, all the things that you know, how do you know them? Like, is it education? That might be the first thing that you might say, right? I went to school. That's how I know the things that I know. But is that really how you know the things that you know? All the things that you know? Think of all the things that you know. You know a lot, right? No matter what you may have thought about yourself, take a step back and realize that you do know a great deal. You know a lot of things. Now, how do you know if you know more or less than somebody else? I mean, that's a hard thing to really figure out. Do I know more than my neighbor, or does my neighbor know more than me? How do I even know what my neighbor knows? Do I even know what my neighbor even thinks about? We don't know at all. Now, some of the sources of knowledge, right, is, wait, actually, you know what? Can we actually start with this? What is knowledge? Let's see. That's an interesting one, right? If we're going to have a conversation about knowledge, let's just start with a definition, I guess, right? So, knowledge is typically defined as justified true belief. All right. Now that's complicated, right? Let's see if we can find another definition of knowledge. All right. Let's just see what we can find. We're just gonna do a quick search. This is real time, right? So you're going to know this when I know this. I didn't come into this conversation with a, preconceived notion of, what I was going to say knowledge was. But here is what another definition of knowledge, and this is just from a quick search. I'm just going to give it to you right now. Facts, information, and the skills acquired by a person through experience or education. Hmm. Experience or education. Experience or education. That is interesting, right? Experience or education. That's very interesting. Awareness or familiarity gained by experience of a fact or situation. That is very, very interesting. Now, here it's going to go off of belief, truth, justification, right? Now, let's just go off of that definition, and really, let's just really unpack it. So, education is the practice or institution in which predetermined sets of information are given to other individuals, oftentimes children. So, children in societies all across the planet are educated. Now, education is an institution. It's an institution in which an agreed upon set of facts are then distributed to children or sometimes adults, right? It's not just a child situation, right? That, in large part, is education. Now, you can look this up and you can find different definitions of education, but education is an institution. Now, that's a really interesting point. So, what we know now, knowledge is power, right? In this situation and in this definition that we just looked up together, right? We just did a quick search on the internet, and that's what it gave us. You can do the same thing, but we're going to operate off of this, right? And so it says education or experience, right? We're going to tackle education first and then we'll do experience next, right? Now, education is interesting because it is an institution, right? It's an institution where in which predetermined sets of facts are then distributed to populations. Education is classically looked at as institutions in which children engage with so that that information is distributed in a standardized way. So education isn't just the agreed upon sets of information, but it's agreed upon sets of information that are then distributed to children at an also agreed upon standardized method. And it follows a timeline. So in many societies, at a certain age, children are expected to be educated on a certain set of facts at a given time or a given age. They are often then evaluated on their ability to have understood those set of facts and memorize those set of facts and then apply those set of facts in an also predetermined and oftentimes standardized evaluation process, oftentimes known as homework, quizzes, or tests or exams. Oftentimes, exams are again standardized and the information is predetermined, right? So, at a given time, an individual in the the institution that is education, they are expected to know something at a certain time, right? And so that is education, right? Education is information that you are given. That's very important. Very important. You're not seeking this information out, you are given that information, right? This is what you need to know. Now, there are going to be information that will be excluded from that, whether it's deemed not important, maybe it's deemed to be deleterious to how that society feels that it should be operating and how it should be constructed. And so it is an agreed upon set of facts, pieces of information that are distributed to people. That is fascinating, such a fascinating observation of society is that educational component. So again, remember, knowledge is power. We're breaking down what knowledge is. The definition that we just looked up is facts, information, and squills and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. Okay, so that's the education part. It's really, really interesting because, you know, we look at education as being a key to so many things, but oftentimes we don't quite understand why education is the way it is. Why are we learning what we are learning and why are we not learning other things? Those are very important questions, right? But you don't know the answer to those oftentimes because they're not necessarily part of the sets of information that have been previously agreed upon to have been given to you. And so you're operating through the world off of, from the educational standpoint, you're operating through the world on sets of information that have been predetermined to be important for you, for us. It's not just you, it's us, it's me. I've got diplomas behind me. That is all part of the institution of education. Okay. Now, the next one is experience. Experience is so interesting, right? I think experience needs a another search. I usually like just, you know, going, but I think experience is another interesting. Here, we're going to do this again. This is another quick search. One of these days, I'm going to start sharing my screen with you so you can see what I'm seeing. What is experience? Right. So it's the prac. So this is word for word what I'm saying, and I'm going to put a little sauce on it, right? Add a little flavor to it for you. But this is word for word what it says: practical contact with an observation of facts or events. Okay? Practical contact. I don't know why they made that so complicated, adding the word practical to it, right? Like, I'm gonna say, what is practical contact? Okay, how many people out there knew what I was talking about, or how many people pretended to know what I was talking about? That's awesome. See, that's another really interesting thing. I know we covered this in another topic. Knowledge and the appearance of having knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? Oftentimes people feign knowledge and people are afraid of admitting ignorance. So many people, if they heard practical contact, they were like, oh yeah, I know exactly what it, but they wouldn't know exactly what that meant. So that's just really, really interesting. And I don't get a definition. Okay. I'm gonna just do a definition of practical. It's not giving me a definition. All right. All right, so let's just do contact, right? Contact is immediate proximity to something, like something touching something, having touching something, an interface, right? No distance between, right? That distance between is not contact. That might be close proximity. Contact is right. Okay. So practical is of or concerned with actually doing something rather than theories of ideas. So when you say practical contact, that's actual contact, actually having done something, right? So in education, I can have part of my science curriculum the understanding of simple machines, one of which is a wedge, right? I might learn everything there is to know about a wedge in class through the educational process, but practical contact with a wedge is the utilization of an axe, right? I now have practical contact. I have an axe in my hand. I swing it. I bust open a piece of wood using a wedge, which is the head of the axe, right? And a lot of people really value that experience that comes from it. But here's a really interesting thing about experience. Experience is really important, right? However, experience is misleading, right? Because we experience things in context of other things, right? And we don't just know what we've experienced, and we don't just know what we have engaged with through education. We can also seek out information ourselves, and we can also create new information, right? And so that is really missing from this concept of knowledge. It really doesn't include the aspect of imagination. Now, a lot of people will say imagination is not important, but I would argue that it is absolutely critical to knowledge. But we'll cover that later. Let's focus now specifically on experience. Experience, as we've talked about before, really involves the individual doing a certain thing. And our interaction with that certain thing is governed and it passes through the filters of our senses, of our awareness. And now, as we've described in episodes in the past, our senses are amazing, but they are incomplete. They miss a lot of things. We know that experience is not always 100%. We can see this through witness testimonials that change over time, right? Or as you recall an event to different individuals, even though you had practical contact with that event, depending on the person that you're telling the situation to, it will change given the individual, right? So you'll tell now you were at a concert, you watched a concert, you were there, it was so important. Some people will say this all the time. Well, have you been there, right? All right, that sounds really good when you say stuff like that, but In this particular situation, the individual goes to a concert. They were there at the concert. They get home. Their parent, let's say this person lives with their parent asks them, how was the concert? The person that went to the concert, in this case, the child of the parent, says, it was fine. It was fun. All right. Did you see anything great? It was great. It was fine. All right. Take a bath, go to bed. So the person goes, take a bath, go to bed. They yell downstairs, hey, ma, call my best friend before going to bed. And the mom or the dad or whatever says, sure, go ahead. Make it quick though, because I want you in the bed. The person picks up the phone and is like, yo, I just went to the most amazing concert. Everybody there was beautiful. Everybody loved my J's, my watch. Everybody loved it. Yo, the concert was amazing. I was like front row. I really could almost feel the sweat from the person on the stage. I know they were singing that song I loved. And while they were singing it, they looked right at me and they pointed at me. I was like, oh my gosh, yo. When they pointed at me, everybody thought I was so special. I was able to get the number of the girl beside me because she thought I was like somehow famous. But anyway, I'll tell you more about it tomorrow. Okay, let's pause right there. Okay. This person, this person had an experience. They were there. And then when they were asked about that experience, or when they told or recalled that experience changed dramatically from the person that they were talking to. So when they were talking to their parent, it was just like, yeah, it was great. Right? No details. But when they were talking to their friend, they really exaggerated details. Now, we don't know if those exaggerations were exaggerations or they were actual situations, right? Because what happens is once we are removed from an experience, that recollection that happens in our head, it is 100% fabricated. 100% fabricated. Every memory is made up. That's why I say imagination is important. It's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons I say imagination is important, right? Because every memory that we have from an experience is made up in our head. Pause right there. Experience is important, but it is not the only thing that is important, right? If someone is arguing, right? We see this in arguments all the time, right? He's like, I know because I've done that. Or two people are arguing about sports. We see this often in sports, right? So I played football, I played high school football, for the best. I'm trying to point to it, but like my sense of like direction is messed up on the screen. Yo, if anybody's talking about football, anyone talk about high school football, this is the best high school football program in the entire state of North Carolina, okay? But that doesn't mean that if I'm arguing with somebody about football that they don't have a point. But oftentimes in arguments, that happens. I'm arguing about football, this, that, and the other. Maybe this football player is that football better than that football player. This team is better than that team. Da, 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 da. And if I were arguing with somebody who's never played football, I would be probably motivated, especially if I run out of good reasons, right? If I am coming to the point where I am struggling to articulate my point, this always happens, right? I will revert to, man, you ain't never even played football. What do you know? You don't know nothing about football. Man, I actually played football. I played football in high school and college. I ain't even about to sit here and let you tell me X, Y, and Z, and you don't know the difference between an X, Y, or Z. Like you don't know nothing about nothing, right? People do that all the time. But I remember I was listening to one of my favorite wide receivers of all time, Chris Carter. Chris Carter was on a television show. He's actually one of my favorite like sports personalities now. I don't see him that often, but he was fantastic. One of my favorite wide receivers of all time, like Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, Chris Carter, Larry Fitzgerald. I'm a wide receiver. I love wide receivers, right? It's my favorite position on the football field. Quarterback, yeah, I mean quarterback's up there too. But wide receiver is incredible, and Chris Carter is one of my favorite of all time, right? He was talking, and somebody said something. Well, this player said this, and Chris Carter said, "You know who actually knows oftentimes the like the least about football? It's the people who play it." And I just remember thinking like that. That's so accurate, so accurate. He's like, yo, the people who know the least about football are oftentimes football players, right? Have you, all right, just point of view, right? You know some of the worst interviews regarding football or regarding any sport, but football, basketball, we're stick with football because that's what we're talking about because we just referenced a quote from Chris Carter, which I might have messed up a little bit, but check it out. You'll find it. Is the worst interview is of the people who actually did it. It is so bad, right? You'll have an amazing you'll have an amazing football game and afterwards everybody is dissecting it and everybody has all these amazing things and insights about the game and amazing takes. And then everybody's so excited. It's like, and then we get the guy who is the player of the game who did all of this stuff. Blankety blank, come on, blankety blank, we're gonna interview you and they interview the person and they're like, yo, so what were you thinking in that play? I was just, I just really wanted to win and my guys are really great. And I just caught the ball. And then, all I saw was grass. So, touchdown. Okay. Well, can you break down everything? Break it all down for us. Well, what happened is there was a guy, I ran past him. He couldn't catch me. And so I scored. And that's what it Yo, the worst interviews are often the people who are doing it, right? So the people with the most experience somehow are the worst at providing insight into something. Also, sometimes the worst coaches or the worst teachers are the people who have experience doing the thing. Quite often, what you find, and you'll find this with artists, you'll find this with scientists, you'll find this with athletes, you'll find it with public speakers, like people who actually do the thing, are sometimes like they lack the knowledge about the thing that they do. That's why they make terrible coaches. Sometimes they're just like, hey, just do this, just do what I do. And they're the person that they're trying to teach it to, they just can't do it. And then when they're trying to figure out how to explain what they do, they realize they don't even know how they do what they do, right? How they do what they do, right? The greatest football player of all time. You can argue whoever it is. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I'm not going to put thoughts in your head. Are they football coaches? Usually not. Usually not. The greatest basketball player of all time. Now you can argue whoever it is. I'm not going to, right? Are they basketball coaches? No, right? But oftentimes with all of these sports, we'll prioritize experience that they actually do it. Oh, this guy was actually a player. This guy, da, 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 da. But if that's so important, then why aren't the people who are the best? Why aren't they? My whole point is it doesn't really all add up. It's hard to really understand how we know what we know. Experience doesn't completely explain it because it is incomplete, right? It exists within a phenomenon known as the egocentric phenomenon. Let's see if we can find what the egocentric phenomenon is because you might not have heard it, right? Here we go. Egocentric phenomenon. Egocentrism is the tendency to view the world primarily from your own perspective, right? Having difficulty fully understanding that others may think or feel differently. And see, that's another problem with experience as well, because someone who's experienced the same exact thing that you may have experienced may interpret that experience very differently. Same thing goes with education. Two people who go through the exact same educational curriculum can still have two completely different outcomes, right? So, if knowledge is simply education and experience, then why do we have such vastly different outcomes for people who have had the same educational curriculum or the same practical contact with an experience? Why then is that the case? The reality is because we don't fully know what knowledge even is. We don't know what someone knows or how they then can apply that knowledge. Have you ever been asked a question and at that moment you're like, I know that, and then like you don't know the answer, right? A day goes by and it pops back into your head, right? Well, you knew it, you just couldn't recall it. So is that a lack of knowledge or an inability to recall something that you know? It is complicated, but those nuances are rarely appreciated when evaluating whether or not somebody knows anything. Again, that's why tests are, oftentimes when we evaluate intelligence or knowledge, the people who create the evaluations are just doing like the lazy approach. Like they have to figure out a way to evaluate hundreds and thousands of people, how to best do that. It's usually not the best way to do it, but it's the quickest, easiest way to do it, but it doesn't really accomplish anything. So that's just really, really good, right? Here's another thing with let me say this right. Egocentrism is that everything we know, our entire reality is within our own heads. Everything that we experience is within our own heads. I remember I was talking to my daughter not too long ago. I say this, a bunch of times. I was like, I feel like I'm the main character, right? I might not be the main character, but I feel like I'm the main character. I'm not even sure if the people that I just left in the grocery store after I leave the grocery store and head back home with my groceries, even if they still exist. Like, do they even exist anymore? You think that's a ridiculous question. I know you think that's a ridiculous question because, of course, they exist, right? Of course, they exist, right? But the only way we even know they exist is because we've had practical contact with them. Like we've experienced them, like we've been able to experience them. But if we're no longer experiencing them, like, do they even really exist? Now, you will say yes, but it is going to be impossible for you to improve it because everything that is exists inside of your head. All right, let me just say that again. Let me say that again. That made my upper lip sweat right there. Everything that exists inside of your own head. Nothing exists outside of your head, or at least you can't prove that it exists outside of your head. Your only attachment with reality, which is everything, is your senses. Is your senses. You don't really know anything outside of your own head. But yet and still we walk around with confidence that we're right just about everything. That's why so few people apologize. You ever wondered why saying sorry is the hardest thing to do? Because you think you're right. But chances are you're not. Chances are you're only existing inside of your own head. You're operating off of your own education, which we just discussed is incomplete, or you're operating off of your own experience, which we just explained is full of flaws. But we walk through the world with such confidence that we know everything. I thought that was interesting that egocentrism, it starts with the word ego, right? We starts with the word ego. Now, oftentimes we refer to ego as kind of a way of talking about like pride, hubris, confidence, arrogance, right? That's what we kind of do it. But that's how we oftentimes approach it. I had this guy who was washing my car not too long ago. He didn't call me out. I was like, oh, why you didn't call me out? I was like, da, 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 da. Because they're supposed to call everybody out. I had to find out that my car is ready, right? And then I was like, man, I just listen. You didn't have to go through all this. All you had to do is say sorry. But I ain't got nothing to apologize for. I was just like, okay, fine, man. It's all right. It's not a big deal. But the fact of the matter of somebody identifying within themselves that they have nothing to apologize for is absolutely ridiculous. Because you're apologizing because of a perceived slight by someone else, but you're evaluating whether or not you should apologize by your own awareness of that slight that happened to somebody else. Isn't that slight an experience of the other person? Like that slight is being perceived by someone else. So you wouldn't necessarily understand fully that you should apologize or what you should apologize for. That's why apologies are so important because it says, okay, let me take a step back. Let me appreciate someone else's perspective for which I don't have, and then maybe apologize for that slight. But most of the time, people evaluate their own actions and their own impact on someone else. I have no idea how you do it, but people do it all the time, right? People do it all the time. People do it all the time. It is absolutely ridiculous. But it just happens, right? So, so here's some examples, right? And because I'm reading right here, so if they're a little bit wonky, just please forgive me. So egocentric, so in adults, egocentrism doesn't disappear, right? Sometimes they say it becomes more subtle. Examples: overestimating how much others notice you, the spotlight effect. Didn't I say I'm the main character, right? I feel like if I walk in a room, everything stops. Everybody's like, oh. We oftentimes notice it like if we have like a pimple like on our face, on our forehead or something, or we got a bad haircut. I need to go to the haircut. I need to go to the barbershop like immediately, right? And we're like, oh gosh, I can't do this, I can't do that. And it really hits you when you're like, I need to go get a haircut. And the person is like, oh, I think you look fine. Like, because they're not even looking at you like that. Unless they're a loved one, most people aren't really like looking at you like that. I mean, they might be looking at me because, like I'm a main character. I'm just joking. Um, I also assuming your knowledge is common knowledge, right? That's the curse of knowledge. Oh gosh, you'll hear this right here, right? It's just common sense. I might say that, right? That is one of the most ridiculous statements ever. It's just common sense. Just use common sense. Bruh, common sense is only common to you. It's all in your head. And you just know it, right? Or maybe people in your friend group, right? But it's just common to you and the people that you have proximity to, right? But people say it all the time, again, curse of knowledge, assuming knowledge is common knowledge, right? Again, if you ever hear someone say it's just common sense, run for the hills. No, don't run for the hills. It's all good. People say it. You probably said it. But it's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely. You probably heard your favorite politician, favorite leader, a teacher, anybody say something about common knowledge. It's also a way of kind of like pushing someone's actions or thoughts like to the perimeter of acceptable thoughts, right? So common knowledge is like this is what normal people think. If you don't know this or think this, you're just like over there. But yeah, that's it. All right, here we go. Believing your interpretation of anything as obviously correct. I'm seeing something, it's obviously correct. Go to any comment section of any social media post, you'll see examples of this. They are all forms of egocentrism, right? And egocentrism impacts communication, leadership, policy, relationships. It can lead to misunderstanding, overconfidence, right? Humility is very important, people. Humility is very important. And poor decision making. That overconfidence, it leads to poor decision making, right? Egocentrism, right? So go through, it's not, listen, they are not limited to these examples. These are just some examples, right? Overestimating how much others notice you, right? That's that, main character, right? Assuming your knowledge is common knowledge, or believing your interpretation is obviously correct. Again, we're all talking about how do you know what you know, right? We say knowledge is power, right? This kind of started from these conversations of intelligence, and intelligence is what you know, and then knowledge is power. And we gave you the example of the queen and her advisor. And then we started really breaking down like what is knowledge, and we said education and experience. And then we quickly dismantled both of those, and now we're really attacking this concept of egocentrism, and you're just really starting to realize how little you know. That's why I say the more you know about a thing, the more you realize how little you know. So I would always say the best approach to anything is just saying, I need to know more. I need to continue my learning. I need to explore. I need to challenge. I need to question. I need to find out, right? There's nothing wrong with that. One of the things that I value most about my PhD training is not my dissertation, is not the papers published, is the culture and the expectation that you should, in public and in private, when being questioned or being grilled, be confident and comfortable with saying, I don't know. That perhaps is the most powerful thing that you can do. If you do not know something, say, I don't know. And one more thing, ask questions. Ask questions. I always say, more important than the right answer is the right question. And kids always say, oh, it's a stupid question. And I tell kids when I talk to their class or teach a class, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, there is one stupid question. And they say, what is it? What is that stupid question? You just said there's no stupid. There is one stupid question. The stupid question is the question that you do not know the answer to, but you refuse to ask. This has been another installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Richard Watkins. It has been an honor, privilege, and pleasure to be with you all today. Remember, the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. Find out more about the Science Policy Action Network at span-inc.org. And remember, the future is not something to wait for. It is something to build. Until next time, take care.